The scent of lilies filled the air, too sweet, almost suffocating. The organ's low hum echoed off the marble walls as people whispered. Behind gloved hands, pretending to mourn but desperate for gossip, Maggie sat in the second row, her black veil trembling slightly with each breath. Her hands were clasped too tightly, the knuckles pale, as if holding herself together was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. At the front, her son Daniel stood behind the podium. He looked handsome, tall, confident, a reflection of his late father. Maggie's heart ached with both pride and pain. Then came the words that shattered everything. "There's one person," Daniel said, voice steady, "who was there for my father when no one else was. The one who truly loved him, who stood by him through his hardest days. Linda Mallister." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Maggie froze. Linda Mallister? Her gaze followed the whispers, and then she saw her. An elegant woman in her 40s, dressed in quiet confidence, sitting in the front row, directly opposite Maggie. Her black dress was simple yet perfect, her expression serene, as though she'd been waiting for this very moment. People turned to look at her, nodding slightly, some even smiling in sympathy. Maggie felt the ground slipping from beneath her feet. Her husband's funeral, and she was now just a spectator. Daniel's words continued, each syllable cutting deeper. "Dad always said Linda was family, and today I want to thank her for being there when we weren't." The audience erupted into polite applause. Maggie's heart shattered silently behind her veil. She wanted to scream, to tell them that she was the wife. She was the one who had held Robert's hand through surgeries, sleepless nights and betrayals. But instead she sat motionless, because grief, humiliation, and betrayal had a way of silencing even the strongest voices. As the ceremony ended, the lawyer, a gray-haired man with a tired face, approached the podium. His voice was calm, clinical. But what he said next sent shockwaves through the hall. According to the last will and testament of the late Robert Hensley, all assets, properties, and personal holdings are to be transferred to Ms. Linda Mallister. A collective gasp filled the room. Maggie felt her stomach twist. Her home, her husband's legacy, gone. Linda didn't flinch. She simply folded her hands, eyes forward like a queen accepting her crown. But what no one in that room knew was that Maggie wasn't done. Beneath the calm exterior, behind the trembling hands and the silent tears, she held something powerful, a secret weapon. A second will, one that could turn the entire story upside down. The house was too quiet. Not the kind of silence that brings peace, but the kind that hums with anger, confusion, and unanswered questions. Maggie sat by the window, still in her black dress. Outside, the evening light dimmed over the garden Robert had planted years ago. Roses and his favorite mice were blooming, almost mocking her with their beauty. On the table before her lay the funeral program, creased and smudged from her trembling hands. Next to it, a stack of unopened sympathy cards. And under those cards, hidden, almost forgotten, was a brown leather folder. Her heart quickened. The second will. It had been months since she last looked at it. Robert had signed it quietly one night, after a bitter argument with Linda Mallister. She still remembered that night vividly. Flashback the study room 6 months earlier. Rain pounded against the windows. Robert sat at his desk, his face pale, his hand shaking slightly as he wrote. "You're really doing this?" Maggie whispered. "After everything she's done?" Robert didn't look up. His voice was heavy with regret. "Linda, she helped me, yes. But she's not family. I lost myself in her for a while. I can't undo that. But this," he tapped the paper, "this is how I make it right." He signed his name slowly, each stroke deliberate, almost penitent. "No one can know yet," he said, folding the document. "Not Daniel. Not Linda. Not until it's time." Maggie nodded, even though her heart was breaking. She wanted to forgive him, but betrayal leaves scars that ink cannot erase. Back to the present, after the funeral. Now, as she opened the folder, Maggie's fingers brushed the familiar signature. Robert's handwriting, his redemption, sealed in ink. She whispered almost to herself, "You wanted to make it right, and I'll make sure you do." But a cold realization crept in. If the lawyer had read a different will today, someone had switched them. Her mind flashed to Linda's calm, composed face at the funeral. Her perfect posture, her quiet confidence. No woman who had just inherited millions would look that unshaken. Unless she already knew the outcome. Maggie's thoughts raced. When had Linda gotten close enough? When had she gained access? Then she remembered. 2 weeks before Robert's death, Linda had visited their home to say goodbye. She had hugged Maggie, left flowers on the table, and stayed just long enough to pour them both a drink. That was when the folder had been on Robert's desk. Maggie's stomach dropped. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. Linda hadn't stolen her husband's heart. She'd stolen his legacy, but not completely, because Maggie had something Linda didn't know. A recording, a late-night confession Robert had left on his phone, explaining everything. A voice that could destroy Linda's entire illusion. Maggie stood up, her grief replaced by resolve. "You played your move, Linda," she whispered. "Now it's my turn." The house felt alive again, but not with warmth. With secrets. Maggie sat at Robert's old mahogany desk. The second will spread before her like a map of unfinished justice. The lamp cast a pale circle of light, cutting through the darkness that had settled in her home and her heart. Her eyes wandered to Robert's things, his fountain pen, his wristwatch, a few scattered papers. And then she saw it. A small black phone tucked behind a stack of medical bills. His personal phone, the one he never let anyone touch. Her breath caught. Robert had used this phone for his work, but near the end, he had barely been able to hold it. Why was it here? She turned it on. The screen flickered to life, showing a simple wallpaper, a photo of the two of them, years ago, smiling in the garden. Her eyes softened. Then as she scrolled through, she noticed a single voice memo, dated just 2 days before his death. Her fingers trembled as she pressed play. "Maggie," Robert's voice began, weak but clear. "If you're hearing this, it means Linda has won, for now." Maggie froze. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. "She came back into my life when I was sick. I thought she cared. But she didn't love me, Maggie. She wanted what I owned. The company, the estate, everything." There was a pause, followed by a cough. "I changed the will, but she found out. She has friends in the firm, people who owed her favors. If anything happens to me, know that I tried to fix it." The recording crackled, his voice breaking. "I was a fool, but you've always been my home. Don't let her destroy what's left of us." The message ended. Silence, except for Maggie's quiet sobs, not of sorrow, but of fury. Everything clicked into place now. Linda hadn't just manipulated her husband emotionally. She had orchestrated everything. The will, the lawyer, even the timing of his death. The calm woman at the funeral wasn't mourning. She was celebrating victory. But not for long. Maggie closed the phone, her face hardening. "You wanted a game, Linda," she whispered. "And you picked the wrong opponent." She placed the phone next to the second will. Side by side, 2 pieces of evidence. 2 truths waiting to explode. Then she opened her laptop. Years of silence had taught her one thing. When the world ignores a quiet woman, that's when she's most dangerous. She started typing. Emails, names, dates, copies of the second will. Robert's lawyer. The board members of his company. The press. Every truth she'd hidden in her grief was now becoming her weapon. And as the clock struck midnight, Maggie finally smiled. Not out of joy, but out of justice waiting to unfold. Because the next day, the world would no longer see her as the forgotten widow. They'd see her as the woman who brought Linda Mallister's empire crashing down. For the first time since Robert's death, Maggie didn't cry. Her grief had hardened into clarity. Every tear she'd shed had become fuel for something colder, sharper. She sat at her desk, a cup of untouched coffee beside her, the second will and Robert's voice recording neatly arranged like chess pieces. Everything was in motion now. Scene 1, the first move, the lawyer. At precisely 8 a.m., she called Mr. Alden, the lawyer who had read the false will at the funeral. Her tone was calm, almost gentle, but there was steel beneath every word. "Mr. Alden," she said, "I think you've made a grave mistake. Or should I say, someone made one for you." There was silence on the other end. A nervous cough. "Mrs. Hensley, I followed the documents submitted to the firm." "Of course you did," Maggie interrupted. "And I'm sure you'll want to cooperate fully when I share the original with the Bar Association and the police." The line went dead. Her message had landed. The first domino had fallen. Scene 2, the second move, the press. By noon, an anonymous email hit the inboxes of 3 major newspapers and a financial blog. Attached were 2 files. The original was signed by Robert Hensley. The audio confession dated 2 days before his death. The subject line read simply, "The truth about the Hensley estate." Within hours, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed outside Linda Mallister's penthouse. News anchors spoke her name with words like fraud, deceit, manipulation. Maggie watched it all unfold from her living room, the headlines scrolling. Across the TV screen, every lie Linda had built was now burning under daylight. Scene 3, the third move, the company. By evening, Maggie arrived at Hensley Holdings, Robert's company, the empire Linda had tried to steal. Employees stopped and stared as she walked through the lobby, dressed not in morning black, but in a sharp gray suit. Her veil was gone. Her eyes were steady. At the boardroom table sat the executives, uncertain, whispering. Maggie placed a folder on the table. "This," she said, "is the real will. Signed, witnessed, and sealed by Robert himself. And this," she slid a flash drive forward, "is his confession. I believe that ends the confusion." One by one, the men and women at the table nodded, stunned. She straightened her posture. "From today, I'll be assuming the position of chairwoman, as per my husband's wishes." No one dared argue. Scene 4, the final strike, Linda's fall. That evening, as the news cycle reached its peak, cameras captured Linda Mallister, leaving her home surrounded by flashing lights and shouting journalists. "Miss Mallister, is it true you forged legal documents? Did you manipulate a dying man's will? Are you aware Mrs. Hensley has the original signature?" Linda didn't answer. Her perfect composure was gone, replaced by the wide-eyed panic of a woman cornered by her own lies. The world now knew the truth. The story of the forged will, the deception, the betrayal. It was everywhere. Headlines called it "The Widow's War," "The Hensley Scandal," and "How Greed Destroys the Golden Ones." But Maggie didn't care about the noise. She had already won the only battle that mattered, the one within herself. Linda Mallister walked through the courthouse doors surrounded by flashing lights and shouted questions. The once flawless woman who had commanded rooms with her charm now looked hollow, her elegance stripped away, her arrogance replaced by fear. Her lawyer's voice trembled as he addressed the judge. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to charges of document tampering, fraud, and obstruction of justice." Maggie sat in the front row, calm and composed, wearing a soft cream suit. No veil, no tears, just quiet strength. The prosecutor played the recording, Robert's confession. The courtroom fell silent as his voice filled the air. "She found out about the will. She has friends in the firm. If anything happens to me..." The audio crackled, and Maggie's eyes closed for a moment, tears shimmering but never falling. When it ended, even the judge's voice softened. "This court finds overwhelming evidence that the will presented at the reading was fraudulent. The estate is to be restored to Mrs. Margaret Hensley, the lawful heir." Linda lowered her head. Her empire, gone. Her reputation, ruined. Everything she'd built on deceit crumbled in public view. Outside, cameras surrounded Maggie as she left the courthouse. Microphones reached for her words. "Mrs. Hensley, do you have any comment on the verdict?" She paused, turning slightly toward the cameras. "Justice doesn't erase pain," she said softly, "but it restores truth. And that's all I ever wanted." Then she walked away. No entourage, no arrogance. Just quiet dignity. The clip went viral overnight. People across the country called her the widow who fought back. That had once felt like a tomb. Now it was alive again. Sunlight spilling through open windows, the air filled with the faint scent of roses. She had kept her promise to Robert. The company was stable. The estate was legally hers. But more than that, she had reclaimed her peace. She walked into the garden, where the wind moved softly through the flowers. In her hands, she held a small box. Inside it, Robert's wedding ring and the pen he had used to sign the real will. Kneeling beside the rose bush, she buried the box gently in the soil. "You made your mistakes," she whispered, "but in the end you found your way back to me." The moment was quiet, sacred. No witnesses, no cameras, just a woman closing a painful chapter. The Hensley Foundation launched its first scholarship program for young women in business and law, founded by Maggie herself. Its mission was simple: to empower women to find their voice, even when the world tries to silence them.